Alex and Noah had always lived a quiet life in the hills, far from the bustling cities and the chaos that seemed to dominate the world. They were twin brothers, inseparable since birth, bound by an unspoken understanding that only siblings who shared the same soul could comprehend. Their parents, both in the military, had died in a tragic accident when they were young, leaving them to raise themselves in a world that felt increasingly alien. Despite the loss, the brothers found solace in their bond, in their shared memories, and in the rugged beauty of their surroundings. Their days were filled with simple pleasures, climbing the tall trees that dotted the edge of the forest, fishing in the nearby river, and exploring the vast wilderness that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. The world felt safe here, untouched by the madness of modern life. But little did they know that their idyllic existence was about to be shattered by something they couldn't begin to fathom. It all started on an ordinary afternoon when Alex and Noah were hiking through the woods, as they had done so many times before. They had heard strange rumors about unusual phenomena occurring in nearby towns, disruptions in the sky, unexplained flashes of light, but they had dismissed them as nothing more than wild speculation. The world was full of strange stories, after all. But today, the air felt different. There was a stillness, an unnatural quiet that sent a shiver down their spines. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the feeling of being watched crept over them. The trees seemed to loom larger, their branches twisting unnaturally in the windless air. Alex, always the more cautious of the two, felt a sense of foreboding settle over him. He grabbed Noah's arm. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. Noah strained his ears but heard nothing out of the ordinary. Yet the feeling of unease lingered. They continued on, their footsteps muffled by the thick underbrush. Then, just as they reached a clearing, they saw it. A creature, tall and impossibly slender, covered in iridescent scales that shimmered like liquid metal, lay sprawled on the ground. Its massive wings, like those of a dragon from an ancient legend, were twisted at unnatural angles, and its breathing was shallow and labored. The creature's head was adorned with sharp, gleaming horns, and its eyes, though half closed, still held a glimmer of intelligence. The twins froze. Their hearts raced in their chests. Alex reached for Noah's hand, his fingers trembling. They had never seen anything like it. The creature was not of this world, and the enormity of that realization hit them like a hammer. But despite the terror that gripped them, either brother moved away. They couldn't. There was something about the creature that stirred a deep, primal empathy within them. It wasn't just the fear of the unknown or the awe of seeing something otherworldly, it was the helplessness, the sheer vulnerability in the creature's eyes. It was in pain. Noah, always the more impulsive of the two, was the first to step forward. "We can't just leave it here," he said, his voice determined yet laced with uncertainty. Alex wanted to argue, but he understood. It was in their nature to help, to protect, to do what was right. They had been raised to believe that compassion was one of humanity's greatest strengths. This creature, whatever it was, needed help. Together, they moved cautiously closer, their breath held in their throats. The creature didn't react, its labored breathing the only sound breaking the unnatural silence around them. Alex knelt beside it, his hands trembling as he reached out to touch its scaly hide. To his surprise, the creature didn't flinch. Instead, it let out a soft, almost imperceptible whine, as though it were acknowledging their presence. Noah quickly took off his backpack, rummaging through it until he found the last of their food, dried meat and some water. "We need to help it heal," he said, his voice low and steady. Alex nodded, unsure of what to do next, but trusting his brother's instincts. They had been through so much together, survived on their own for so long. If anyone could figure out how to help this creature, it was them. Noah carefully began to offer the dried meat to the creature, holding it near its mouth. At first, it didn't respond, but after a moment, the creature's tongue flicked out, tasting the air. Then, with surprising gentleness, it took the food from Noah's hand, its sharp teeth carefully tearing into the meat. The brothers exchanged a look, an unspoken agreement that they had done the right thing. As they fed the creature, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that they were crossing some invisible line, doing something that would change everything. The creature was no ordinary animal, and yet, it seemed to be more than just a beast. There was something intelligent in the way it moved, in the way it looked at them with those piercing eyes, as if it was trying to communicate something vital. As the creature ate, its breathing began to slow, and the tightness in its wings seemed to ease. The brothers continued to feed it, their fears slowly being replaced by awe. It was healing, not just physically, but somehow emotionally as well. The bond they were forming with this strange creature was unlike anything they had ever experienced before. It wasn't just about helping an injured animal. It felt as though they were sharing something much larger, something beyond their understanding. Just as the last of the food was gone, the creature's eyes flashed open wide, and for a moment, the twins could have sworn they saw a glint of recognition in them. The silence between them was thick, charged with an unspoken knowledge that this moment, this encounter, would mark the beginning of something monumental. But before either of them could fully process what had just occurred, a deep, guttural sound emanated from the creature's throat. It was a sound unlike anything they had ever heard, a low, resonant growl that reverberated through the very ground beneath them. The sound sent a chill down their spines. It wasn't just a cry of hunger or pain, it was a call, a summons to something far beyond their comprehension. And in that moment, Alex and Noah understood, deep in their bones, that they had done something much more than feed an injured creature. They had awakened something. The ground beneath them rumbled softly, almost imperceptibly, and they looked at each other, their hearts racing once again. They had no way of knowing it yet, but that moment, that decision to help, had just set off a chain of events that would change the fate of the galaxy, and humanity, forever. The boys stood, frozen, as the creature's call echoed through the air. The forest around them grew unnaturally quiet, as if holding its breath. They had no idea what was coming next, but one thing was certain: the world they knew was about to be ripped apart. The brothers had barely processed the enormity of what had just transpired when the ground beneath them began to tremble. At first it was subtle, like the quiver of an earthquake deep in the Earth's core. But it didn't take long for the shaking to intensify, growing in strength and frequency. The trees, once towering symbols of nature's resilience, began to sway. Leaves that had once clung firmly to their branches now fell in torrents, swirling around the brothers as if caught in a storm. Noah, ever the more impulsive of the two, reached for his brother's arm. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice tinged with panic. Alex, his heart pounding in his chest, didn't need any convincing. His eyes darted around, scanning the woods, looking for any sign of danger. But nothing was there, or so it seemed. The atmosphere, once serene, now felt alive with a kind of hostility, an oppressive energy pressing in from all sides. The creature, which had been so calm and fragile just moments ago, stirred again. Its eyes flashed with an intensity that sent a shiver down the twins' spines. The boys didn't know what it was trying to convey, but they could feel it. Something was coming. Something massive. They had no idea how, but the creature's pain had somehow triggered a chain reaction that would lead to their destruction, or their salvation. They turned and bolted through the trees, the fear propelling them forward with a raw energy they didn't know they had. The rumble beneath their feet grew stronger, reverberating up through their bodies, shaking them to their very cores. It was no longer just the ground beneath them that trembled. The very air seemed to thicken, making it harder to breathe. They were running blind, desperate to get away, but the sound of the growl they had heard earlier seemed to echo around them, bouncing off the trees, resonating deep in their bones. And then, as if the forest itself had come alive with a single thought, the boys heard it, the sound of something large and fast, something massive moving through the woods. The trees cracked and groaned as though they were being torn apart. It wasn't just the shaking earth they had to worry about, it was the predators that followed, the ones the creature had called upon. The sound grew louder, closer. Alex's mind raced, trying to make sense of it. The creature had made a sound, a call, and in response, something had arrived. He wanted to tell Noah to keep running, to push forward, to get to safety, but he knew it was already too late. The forest had shifted from a sanctuary into a death trap. The air was heavy with something dark and ancient, something that neither of them could have predicted. The growling was now joined by another sound, a more mechanical, rhythmic thudding, like the beating of a war drum. It was so close now, so loud, that Alex and Noah could feel the vibrations in their teeth. The creatures, whatever they were closing in. And as they broke through the underbrush into a small clearing, they saw them, figures cloaked in metallic armor, moving with uncanny precision. They were like nothing the twins had ever seen. Their suits were seamless, reflecting light in ways that made it impossible to determine where one part of the suit began and another ended. These beings didn't walk. They moved like predators on the hunt, each step taken with the kind of fluidity only seen in animals with a singular purpose. The boys froze, their eyes wide with fear. The air around them felt thick, like a storm was about to break. And then, just as quickly as they appeared, the armored beings stopped. They were as still as statues, their helmeted heads turning slightly to examine the brothers. The silence stretched on, the only sound being the heavy, uneven breaths of the twins, still reeling from the chaos unfolding before them. Noah, ever the protector, stepped forward, trying to shield his brother from the terrifying figures. But he wasn't sure if it was bravery or desperation that drove him. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice more forceful than he felt. The creatures didn't respond. Instead, one of them reached out, its arm extending with mechanical precision. Noah flinched, instinctively stepping back, but it wasn't toward him that the figure moved. It was toward the creature they had found earlier. Alex couldn't believe his eyes. The creature, which had seemed so frail and vulnerable just minutes ago, was now the center of attention. The armored figures had formed a circle around it, their movements perfectly synchronized as they approached with reverence and awe. Whatever this creature was, whatever bond it shared with these beings, it was clear that it held immense significance, more than they could understand. For the first time in the entire encounter, Alex felt a flicker of hope. Maybe these beings weren't here to harm them. Maybe they had come to protect the creature, to ensure its survival. But that hope was quickly dashed as the figure closest to them turned its head, its helmet reflecting the cold, unforgiving light of the setting sun. It wasn't just a soldier, it was a commander, one who held power, who held authority, and whose expression, though hidden behind a mask, radiated a chilling certainty. And that certainty was directed at the brothers. "You have made a grave mistake." The commander's voice boomed, not with malice, but with an undeniable authority. The sound was harsh, reverberating in the air like the deep rumble of thunder. "You have awoken what should have remained dormant." Noah's heart raced as he struggled to process the words. A mistake? What had they done? They had only tried to help. Alex, too, was frozen in place, his thoughts spinning. This was no ordinary rescue mission. This wasn't just about saving a creature, it was about something much, much bigger. Without warning, the air shifted again, the ground beneath them shaking more violently than ever. A roar, primal and guttural, echoed from deep within the forest. The air was charged with energy, electric, as though the entire atmosphere was preparing for battle. "They are coming," the commander intoned, his voice low, almost a whisper. "And you have no idea what you've set in motion." As the soldiers moved in unison to form a protective circle around the creature, Alex and Noah realized the truth. The creature wasn't just a dragon or a lost alien, it was the offspring of something far older, far more powerful. And they had no idea what they had just unleashed by feeding it, by showing compassion. The darkness was closing in, and there was no way to outrun what was coming next. The tension in the air was suffocating. Alex and Noah stood frozen in the center of the clearing, surrounded by alien soldiers whose presence felt more like an unshakable weight than an army. The armored figures were relentless in their precision, their movements eerily coordinated, as if their existence was one giant, singular thought. These weren't just soldiers, they were a force, an unstoppable unit that obeyed the same terrifying orders. The brothers could feel the eyes of the creatures on them, their alien gazes like a chilling spotlight that never faltered. The air grew colder, and a sudden, overwhelming sense of danger gripped their chests. Noah could feel his heartbeat racing, a primal instinct telling him to run. But his feet were rooted to the ground. Something about the situation felt too unreal to comprehend. This wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. The soldiers had been waiting for something, waiting for the call of the creature, waiting for the signal. And now that the creature had been found, the brothers realized too late that they were a part of something far larger than they could have imagined. The commander stepped forward, his metallic armor glinting in the dying light of the day. He didn't need to say another word for the twins to understand the gravity of their actions. His presence alone spoke volumes. "You've drawn the attention of forces beyond your understanding." The commander spoke with an unsettling calmness. The coldness in his tone made it clear that this wasn't a warning, it was a declaration. The boys were caught in a web, and escape wasn't an option. Alex's thoughts raced. The creature they had fed, the one that had been so fragile, so vulnerable, was far more important than they'd ever realized. It was no accident that the soldiers had appeared when it did. This wasn't about helping an injured being. It was about something much deeper, something ancient. The fact that they had cared for it had somehow triggered something in the cosmos, something that no one could take back. Noah clenched his fists. He wasn't a soldier, but he had enough of an understanding of conflict to know that things had just escalated to an unimaginable level. "We didn't mean to do anything wrong," Noah said, his voice shaking but defiant. "We didn't know. We just wanted to help." The commander's head tilted, the motion so slight that Alex could have sworn it wasn't real. But his gaze never wavered. "You know nothing of the ancient forces that move through this galaxy. You are insignificant in the grand scheme, but that creature—" He motioned toward the creature, which was now being guarded by the surrounding soldiers. "It is not. It is the heir to a power so vast that your world cannot contain it." The brothers were silent, processing the weight of his words. They had unknowingly fed the son of an ancient, unimaginable power, and in doing so, they had sealed their own fate. The soldiers were here because of that moment of kindness, a kindness that had unwittingly altered the trajectory of their lives. The commander continued, his voice still eerily calm, but with an unmistakable edge. "You have activated a chain of events that will unfold whether you want it to or not. There is no escaping this. The Empire will know of this moment, and it will not be forgotten. You will either serve or be eradicated." His words echoed like a death knell, and Noah's stomach twisted in response. Alex felt his pulse quicken. "What do you want from us?" he demanded, though the question seemed pointless. It was clear now that they had no control over the situation. They were pawns in a game that they didn't even know they had been entered into. The commander's lips twitched, as though the question had amused him. "What we want is irrelevant. What matters is that you now belong to the forces that will either destroy or save this galaxy." His words were heavy, like the weight of the stars themselves hung in the balance. "Your world is not what you think it is. Earth is a footnote, a fragment of a much larger story. And now you will play your part, whether you're ready or not." The air grew colder still. The brothers could feel it in their bones. It was a warning. The kind of warning that came with the inevitability of fate. They had no control over what was coming next. They had touched something that had always been there, lying dormant, and now they had become a part of it. Noah's mind reeled. He had grown up thinking that humanity was the center of the universe, that they were special. But now, facing these beings, these invaders from the stars, it became clear that Earth was nothing more than a speck in the grand scheme of things. The power that existed beyond their understanding was beyond comprehension. It was so much bigger than anything they had ever known. The world they thought they knew had been shattered in an instant. Alex stood tall, despite the terror gnawing at his insides. He turned to Noah. "We can't let them win. We can't just give up." His voice was steady, but it carried a quiet urgency. "We don't know what this creature means, but we have to find a way to stop this, whatever this is." Noah nodded, though the fear in his eyes was undeniable. "But what can we do? They have all the power. They have everything." Alex didn't have an answer, but his resolve remained unbroken. There was something in the creature's eyes, something more than fear, more than pain. It was a silent plea, a desperate cry for help. Alex couldn't explain it, but he knew that this was more than just an alien encounter. This was a battle for something far greater. The creature was more than just a casualty in a war. It was a symbol of hope. And the brothers had no intention of standing down, no matter how insurmountable the odds. They had fed it, helped it, and now they would fight for it, for the future of their planet, for their survival, and for the hope of defeating the forces that had come for them. And as the cold winds swept through the clearing, and the soldiers encircled them like a silent death march, Alex and Noah knew that this was just the beginning. They were no longer the boys they had been before. They had been thrust into something far beyond their comprehension. But they would face it, head on, with the strength they never knew they had. The confrontation had escalated far beyond any expectation. The soldiers around them were no longer just intimidating figures. They were an impending storm. Their cold, emotionless stares conveyed an unspoken truth. There was no way out. The brothers understood now that their actions had drawn them into a web of unimaginable forces, one that they could neither escape nor fully comprehend. The power that had once seemed so distant, so abstract, was now very real, and it was closing in on them. Despite the crushing weight of the situation, the brothers found themselves moving forward, not out of blind bravery but because there was simply no other choice. The idea of giving up, of surrendering to whatever fate awaited them, was far more terrifying than standing and fighting, even if it seemed hopeless. The soldiers were closing in, their presence overwhelming, but the boys stood their ground. The air hummed with a tense energy, the kind that fills the space before a storm hits, heavy with anticipation. The commander's words still echoed in Alex's mind, each one more chilling than the last. "You will either serve or be eradicated." The weight of those words felt unbearable, a prophecy they could not ignore. The idea that they were nothing more than insignificant players in a much larger game was both humiliating and terrifying. Yet there was a quiet strength that began to stir within them, a shared understanding that they had to do something. Anything. Alex caught his brother's gaze, and in that look, there was an unspoken agreement. They would not go quietly. They couldn't. The thought of succumbing to forces beyond their understanding was unbearable, and for the first time, they realized just how deep the stakes went. They weren't just fighting for their lives, they were fighting for the future of everything they held dear. The fate of their world, their people, hung in the balance, and they were the only ones who stood between it and the void. "What happens now?" Noah asked, his voice quiet but firm, though the fear still clung to his words. The commander's gaze shifted toward him, cold and unfeeling. "Now we take you with us," the commander replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "Your fate is already sealed. You will be judged, and your actions will determine whether you live or die." Noah's heart sank, but Alex's resolve hardened. He couldn't let it end like this. They hadn't come this far, hadn't faced down this impossible situation, to give up now. There had to be a way out. There had to be something they could do to change the course of this inevitable clash. And for a moment, Alex's mind flashed to the creature they had saved. It was still there, still in their midst, and its silent presence was a reminder that it had a purpose far beyond what they had understood. Alex's mind worked quickly, his thoughts racing as he tried to piece together a plan. The soldiers around them were formidable, but the one thing they had that the soldiers didn't was knowledge of Earth, of human resilience, and of the survival instinct that had kept their species at the top of the food chain for so long. They had survived against overwhelming odds before. This would be no different. "I'm not going with you," Alex said, his voice steady but resolute. The words felt strange, but once they left his mouth, they felt right. He was done playing by the rules of an empire he didn't understand. This wasn't their fight anymore, it was something far bigger. The commander stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "You will comply. Resistance is futile." Alex didn't flinch. "You can't force us. You don't know us. You don't know what we're capable of." His voice was gaining strength with every word. "We may not have your technology, your armies, or your knowledge, but we have something that you can't control, our will. And we'll fight to the end for it." For a moment there was silence. The air seemed to thicken, and the commander's expression remained unreadable, but Alex could see the faintest flicker of something in his eyes. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even surprise. It was uncertainty. Alex had struck a chord, one he hadn't expected to strike. The commander didn't reply immediately, but his hesitation spoke volumes. In that moment, Alex realized something he hadn't before. The soldiers, the empire they served, were not invincible. They may have the power to destroy worlds, but they did not understand the one thing that made humanity unique: its refusal to bend in the face of tyranny. Noah, though still shaken, stood beside his brother, his voice steadying. "You underestimate us," he said. "You may have all the weapons, the power, the numbers, but you don't know what we can do when we fight for something we love. When we fight for each other." His words rang with a fierce determination, a conviction that even the soldiers couldn't ignore. The commander regarded them for a long moment, then turned slightly, as though contemplating their defiance. The soldiers around them remained silent, watching as the tension in the air grew even thicker. The creature, still by their side, emitted a soft, almost imperceptible sound, as though it too recognized the importance of the moment. It was more than just a symbol of power. It was a reminder of the connection that the brothers had forged with it, a bond that transcended language, race, and even species. Finally, the commander spoke, his voice still cold but tinged with a hint of grudging respect. "You are fools," he said, but the words lacked the conviction they once held. "But I will not underestimate you further. You will either die here or live to fight another day. But know this: the consequences of your actions will reverberate throughout the galaxy." As the commander turned to leave, the soldiers followed, their footsteps in perfect synchrony. But the brothers stood there, unbowed. Their fate was uncertain, but they had taken the first step in taking back control of their future. They had refused to be cowed. They had refused to be silent. And that, more than anything else, was the beginning of their fight. As the soldiers retreated into the distance, the brothers exchanged a glance, the unspoken understanding between them clear. The journey ahead would be fraught with danger, filled with enemies that far surpassed their understanding. But they had each other, and they had the will to fight for something bigger than themselves. And that was enough to light the spark of defiance within them, no matter how dark the road ahead might seem. The world outside the confines of their small, isolated existence was changing at a pace they couldn't possibly have predicted. Alex and Noah stood at the edge of a future that was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. What had started as an act of compassion, feeding the alien dragon's son, had set into motion a chain of events that neither of them could have foreseen. It had been a simple gesture, driven by nothing more than the desire to help. They had no idea that this small act would ultimately alter the course of their lives, and possibly the fate of entire civilizations. The world of intergalactic politics and warfare was something they had never considered. Earth, in their minds, was just another small planet in a vast, indifferent universe. They had never imagined that their actions, as insignificant as they may have seemed in the grand scheme of things, would draw the attention of powerful forces. The soldiers who had arrived after the creature's rescue weren't there just for a simple confrontation. They were harbingers of something much larger, something they could not ignore. Alex felt the weight of the responsibility pressing on him. Their encounter with the alien soldiers had left them shaken, but it had also lit a fire within him that he couldn't extinguish. They were not just two boys anymore. They were now part of something much bigger, a galaxy-wide struggle that would test their resolve in ways they could never have imagined. The creature they had saved was a symbol now, a connection between Earth and forces far beyond their understanding. It wasn't just an animal to them anymore. It was a key to a future they hadn't chosen, but one they would have to face. But there was more at play here than just survival. The boys realized, as the tension of the situation began to settle into something more concrete, that their actions had inspired something. The soldiers, the alien commander, they were not the end of the story, they were the beginning. The respect they had garnered from the commander wasn't out of fear, but out of recognition. These were beings of power, of unimaginable reach, and yet they had seen something in Alex and Noah that set them apart. They were human, and their humanity was a force to be reckoned with. That realization hung heavy in the air, A constant reminder that no matter how hopeless it seemed, they were capable of making a difference. What did it mean, though, to be a part of this conflict? What was their role in the vast chessboard of intergalactic diplomacy and war? The brothers knew they were too small, too young, and too inexperienced to truly understand the intricacies of what they had become involved in. Yet there was a strength in them that could not be denied. They may have been thrust into the center of a galactic conflict, but they were not helpless. They had their wits, their bond, and their unyielding spirit. Together, they could face whatever came next. Their minds turned to the consequences of their actions. They knew the creature they had saved was important enough that the soldiers had followed them, but how did it tie into the greater scheme? What was the significance of its connection to them? Was it merely a matter of saving a life, or was there something deeper at play? As they pondered these questions, they began to understand that their actions were not isolated incidents. The universe, vast and unknown as it was, operated on a set of laws and forces that transcended mere individuals. Every action had a ripple effect, and their small decision to feed the alien dragon's son had created a tidal wave that they couldn't escape. They had been pulled into something that they could neither predict nor control. But as the days passed and they continued to reflect on their choices, one thing became clear to them: they could choose how to respond. They could choose to cower, to bend beneath the weight of forces beyond their control, or they could choose to stand tall. It was a choice they had to make, and they knew there was only one option. The sense of isolation they had once felt, growing up in a world that seemed so far removed from the rest of the universe, had slowly begun to fade. They were no longer alone. They had allies, whether they were the alien creatures who had once been their enemies, or the human beings who would soon hear their story. They had a purpose now, a reason to fight. The brothers understood that their actions could lead to something greater, something beyond just saving themselves. They were part of a much larger narrative, one that was being written by their choices, and they would not let it be a story of fear or surrender. As they faced the unknown future, they also realized that the power they had come to wield wasn't just a result of the creature's intervention or the soldiers' attention. It came from within them, from the bond they shared and the shared values they held dear. The brothers had always been close, but now they were connected by something far deeper, by the understanding that their actions, however small, had consequences. It wasn't just about surviving the conflict. It was about ensuring that humanity's strength, its capacity for empathy, and its refusal to give up, were not lost in the face of overwhelming odds. The galaxy was not a place of simple rules or predictable outcomes. It was a place of chaos, of shifting alliances, of conflicting motivations, and of strange, unimaginable forces. Yet, even in this vast, unpredictable expanse, one truth remained unchanged: the heart of humanity, its unwavering desire to protect and preserve, could not be underestimated. The brothers had learned that in the most painful, profound way possible. Their fight was just beginning, but they had found something far more powerful than any weapon or military force: the power of hope, of unity, and of defiance in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. They had no way of knowing where the path ahead would take them, but one thing was certain: they would not walk it alone. They had each other, and they had the will to fight for what they believed in. Together, they would face whatever came next, knowing that the future of Earth, of humanity, and of the galaxy itself, depended on their courage and determination to rise above the darkness that sought to consume it all.